So, um, if you were to just leave a master blueprint for a literal trillion-dollar empire sitting out in the open on a coffee shop table, I mean, you should probably expect someone to read it,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And today, we actually have our hands on exactly that kind of document. It's this highly strategic, incredibly granular, public-facing pitch. And it's dated exactly today, May 7, 2026.
Right.
It's titled Netizen, Unicorns, Solaras, and the Marketing Propulsions They Need.
Quite the title.
It really is. And it's written by this self-described digital marketing guru. But what's wild is that it is squarely aimed at one specific person.
Just one guy.
Yeah, Gaurav Chakrabarty. He's the CEO of this cutting-edge biotech company called Solugen. And, well, the pitch essentially promises to take his company from a $2 billion valuation to a $1 trillion valuation.
Which is just, I mean, it's a staggering jump. And what makes this document stand out immediately, at least for me, is the cognitive dissonance it creates right from the jump. Well, if you look at standard corporate pitch decks, the kind churned out by McKinsey or Bain or whoever.
Right, the usual suspects.
Exactly. They are incredibly sterile. They focus on these tiny incremental optimizations like, oh, we can lower your customer acquisition cost by a few dollars, or, find some fractional efficiency in your supply chain.
Maybe capture like a 2% larger market share if you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. But this document, it completely throws that playbook out the window. It starts by invoking ancient religious scriptures.
Wait, really? Scriptures?
Yeah, it talks about these prophecies of an impending age of abundance, and then the author takes that ancient concept and maps it directly onto modern artificial intelligence and tech startups.
Okay, let me stop you right there because reading that opening section gave me serious whiplash.
I bet.
I honestly had to double check if I was reading a B2B SaaS proposal or like a manifesto.
It definitely reads like a manifesto in parts.
Right. Because you have a marketer walking into the office of a CEO who runs this highly technical biochemical manufacturing company, and the opening argument is basically about human destiny.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is this just performative eccentricity, or is there an actual functional, I don't know, psychological mechanism at play here?
Oh, it is an incredibly calculated filter.
Hmm.
Honestly, it's brilliant if you break it down. Consider the psychological state of a founder who has already built a $2 billion company.
Okay.
They have survived the startup crucible, right?
Okay.
They are constantly insulated by layers of executives, and, well, their daily inputs are highly quantified.
Lots of spreadsheets.
Exactly. Spreadsheets, data dashboards, quarter-over-quarter growth charts. If you come to them speaking that same language of optimization, you are just another vendor.
You just blend in.
Right. Get pushed down to the chief marketing officer or a VP of sales. You're not talking to the visionary founder anymore. So by invoking this age of abundance and historical destiny, the author forces a total state change in the reader. It signals that this conversation isn't about quarterly earnings. It's about historical significance. And it's designed to polarize.
Polarize how? Like weed people out.
Exactly. A small thinking executive will just throw it in the trash. They'll think it's crazy. But a hyper-ambitious founder, they will lean in.
That makes a lot of sense. And, that ambition is just front and center when you look at the pedigree this author actually claims.
Oh yeah, the confidence is off the charts.
Right. Because before we can even dissect the actual strategy being pitched to Solugen, we really have to examine the sheer audacity of the person making the pitch.
We do.
Because according to the text, this author made a list of 100 promising AI tech startup ideas.
100.
100. And they ran the math, narrowed it down to 10 potential unicorns, companies with $1 billion potential.
Right, the standard Silicon Valley dream.
Exactly. But then they isolated a single concept capable of reaching a $1 trillion valuation. And their conclusion wasn't like a new AI medical device or some revolutionary quantum hardware.
No, it wasn't.
The golden ticket they identified was applying AI to marketing.
Which is such a fascinating underlying thesis. Because they're basically arguing that artificial intelligence, at its absolute core, is a massive lever for generating and testing human narratives at scale.
Narrative at scale.
Yeah. Think about it. If you can automate the persuasion machinery, you don't just optimize your sales funnel. You can theoretically manufacture market demand out of thin air.
That's a wild thought.
It is. And they back up this whole thesis by claiming to hold the absolute top recognition in the digital marketing industry.
Hmm.
They literally compare their status to holding an Academy Award.
An Oscar for marketing.
Exactly.
Which, I mean, that brings us to the financial reality of this pitch, because in the document, they reference their book. It's called Marketing Escape Velocity, and they lay out their standard compensation model for any tech startup that has achieved product market fit.
Here we go. The numbers.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize these numbers for you listening because they are just staggering. The author demands 20% of the company's gross revenues,
20%.
plus 20% of any money raised from investors.
It's unheard of.
It's insane. It's like hiring a real estate agent to sell your house, but instead of taking a standard 3% commission at closing, they demand the master bedroom, the keys to your second car, and a 20% cut of your salary for the next 10 years just to put the listing up.
That's a great analogy.
How does anyone justify walking into a room and asking for a fifth of a company's entire lifeblood?
So to understand that fee structure, we really have to define what product market fit actually means in this specific context.
Okay, break that down for me.
A startup with true product market fit isn't just experimenting anymore. They have built something that the market is actively pulling out of their hands.
It's like they can't make it fast enough.
Exactly. Their existential risk of failure, the risk that nobody wants what they're building, is largely gone. Their only remaining challenge is scaling their distribution.
Okay, I'm with you.
So when a consultant walks in and asks for 20% of top-line revenue and 20% of new capital, they are making a profound structural argument. They are refusing the label of consultant or vendor.
They're essentially demanding to be treated as a late-stage co-founder.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because standard marketing agencies, what do? They take a flat retainer or a percentage of your ad spend.
Right, like 10% of whatever you spend on Facebook ads.
Exactly. And that inherently incentivizes them to just spend your money, regardless of whether it actually grows the company's valuation. But this model, it aligns the author entirely with the company's capitalization and overall growth rate.
Because if the company doesn't make money or doesn't raise money, the marketer gets nothing.
It is a wildly aggressive demand, but it fundamentally changes the dynamic. It communicates that the author fully expects their narrative engineering to be the primary engine of the company's future value.
They're saying, I am the fuel.
I am the rocket fuel, yeah.
And that leads directly into the terminology they use to redefine that future value. Because for a decade now, unicorn has been like the holy grail of Silicon Valley, right?
Oh, yeah. The billion-dollar milestone.
But the author introduces this entirely new piece of vocabulary, the Solara.
The Solara.
Yeah. They define a Solara as a company with $1 trillion potential. And they actually predict that Solaras will be as common in 10 years as unicorns are today.
You really have to look at the linguistic engineering there.
What do you mean?
Well, when Aileen Lee coined the term unicorn back in, 2013, it was meant to describe something nearly mythical, an anomaly.
Right, because billion-dollar startups were super rare.
Exactly. But today, because of venture capital inflation and massive market shifts, there are hundreds of unicorns.
Yeah.
The magic is kind of gone.
It's almost standard now.
Right. So if you are Gareb Chakrabarty, your company is already valued at $2 billion.
You already beat the game.
You did. You won.
Mm-hmm.
You might be getting comfortable, maybe looking toward a standard IPO or a nice acquisition.
So the author creates the word Solara to basically move the goalposts.
Exactly. It is a psychological trap designed to reignite a founder's hunger.
Yeah.
Because Solara invokes the sun. It implies this massive gravity-creating entity that sustains an entire solar system of other businesses around it.
Oh, that's really interesting.
By handing this document to a successful founder, the author is basically whispering, hey, $1 billion is small thinking. If you stop now, you are settling. You have the potential to become a sun, not just a mythical horse.
Man, that is powerful. But, you can't just build a sun out of any material.
No, you need the right fuel.
Right. Which means we really need to look at the vehicle chosen for this journey, Solugen, because the pitch gives us this highly detailed snapshot of where the company stands in May 2026.
Right.
And, okay, so they are valued at $2 billion. They have this massive war chest of $850 million in raised capital.
Huge amounts of cash.
Huge. But their actual revenue in 2024 was only around $44.7 million.
Which is such a classic deep tech financial profile.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it's the definition of deep tech venture capital. They are carrying this massive valuation based entirely on future potential. And they require staggering capital expenditures to build out physical infrastructure.
Because they aren't just building an app, they're building physical stuff.
Exactly. Generating $44 million in revenue while holding an $800 million war chest means they're in that crucial, super dangerous transition phase.
The gap between the lab and the real world.
Yes, between proving the science works and actually scaling it to industrial production.
And I mean, the science itself is what justifies that massive war chest. The document centers heavily on Solugen's BioForge platform.
The BioForge.
Yeah. And for you listening, let's just contextualize this really quickly. The modern chemical industry is essentially the invisible scaffolding of human civilization.
It really is. It's in everything.
Yeah. Everything. The plastics in your laptop, the fertilizers growing your food, the materials inside the walls of your house, the detergents in your washing machine. Almost all of it starts as crude oil that is pulled out of the earth.
Yep.
And that oil is sent to these massive, incredibly dirty refineries where it's subjected to intense heat and pressure to literally crack the petroleum molecules apart and synthesize them into chemicals.
It's a highly finite, highly polluting process.
Exactly. But Solugen's BioForge, it bypasses the petroleum entirely.
Which is the magic trick.
It's wild. They use plant sugars and engineered enzymes to produce sustainable, high-performance chemicals at room temperature.
Room temperature, that's the crazy part. The economic implications of replacing heat and pressure with enzymatic biology, it just cannot be overstated.
Because heat and pressure cost money.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
Think about it. Green technology historically comes with a green premium.
Right, where you have to pay more for the eco-friendly version.
Exactly. You ask the consumer or the business buyer to pay a little extra for the privilege of saving the environment. But Solugen's core proposition is that biomanufacturing, once it's actually scaled up, is fundamentally cheaper and more efficient than petroleum extraction.
So that they aren't just pitching decarbonization to save the polar bears.
No, they're pitching superior unit economics.
Money talks.
Always.
And the pitch names specific products they are already manufacturing to prove that this isn't just, science fiction.
Right. They have actual stuff you can buy.
Yeah. They mention Altiv, which are bio-based detergent builders. They mention bioperoxide and azogen fertilizer.
So they're already touching agriculture, water treatment, consumer cleaning products.
All the big industries. And the author uses a very specific phrase to describe this potential. They call Solugen the Tesla of chemicals.
The Tesla of chemicals.
Now, I want to challenge that analogy a bit. Because Tesla took an existing technology, the electric car, which at the time was seen as this slow, ugly compromise for environmentalists, right?
The old golf cart image.
Exactly. And they made it incredibly fast, luxurious, and culturally cool. They made it a status symbol.
They absolutely did.
But Solugen makes invisible ingredient chemicals. So how do you make, bioperoxide a status symbol?
Well, here's the thing. You don't make the chemical a status symbol. You make the supply chain a status symbol.
Okay, wait, explain that.
The Tesla analogy holds up perfectly when you look at the market mechanics. Tesla didn't just sell cool cars. They completely shifted the Overton window of the entire automotive industry.
What do you mean by Overton window in this context?
They changed what the public viewed as acceptable and expected. They forced legacy automakers like Ford, General Motors, Volkswagen to completely restructure their manufacturing pipelines.
Right.
Because overnight, the consumer expectations shifted.
Oh, I see. So if Ford didn't make an EV, they looked obsolete.
Exactly. So the goal for Solugen isn't to make fertilizer sexy. It's to make petroleum-based manufacturing culturally and economically unacceptable. And this connects right back to the author's opening framing about the age of abundance.
Right, the prophecy stuff.
Yes. The petroleum economy is fundamentally an economy of extraction and scarcity. You find oil, you drill it out of the ground, you fight geopolitical wars over it, and eventually it runs out.
It's a zero-sum game.
It is. But plant sugars and enzymes, that represents an economy of true abundance. You can grow the inputs over and over. You can replicate the enzymes endlessly in a lab.
It's renewable at a fundamental level.
Exactly. If you successfully decouple the global manufacturing of physical materials from finite fossil fuels, you rewrite the foundational economic equations of the modern world.
That is massive.
And that is how a company reaches a $1 trillion valuation.
But I mean, mapping out that kind of transition requires a level of planning that standard startups rarely survive.
It's incredibly hard.
Right, and the author proposes something they call the Grand Solara Vision. The metaphor they use heavily in the text is the Apollo program.
A classic scale metaphor.
Yeah, and the document explicitly warns against, launching to the moon and debating the direction mid-flight.
You can't do that.
No. It demands this rigorous 10-year action plan covering product roadmaps, manufacturing scale-ups, market expansion, capital raising, and talent acquisition. Basically, everything must be subservient to that trillion-dollar endgame.
It really is a fascinating application of systems engineering to corporate strategy.
How so?
Because startups usually operate on agile methodology, right?
Yes.
They sprint for a few weeks, test the market, pivot if it doesn't work, and try again. Move fast and break things.
Right, the classic software model.
But the author is arguing that when you are building massive physical infrastructure, like a literal biochemical refinery, you cannot afford to pivot.
Because you're pouring concrete.
You are pouring concrete, you're buying million-dollar industrial vats. The strategy has to be locked in with the precision of orbital mechanics.
But interestingly, the author also introduces a counterweight to that rigidity. They talk about the jazz of execution.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, they acknowledge that while the Apollo trajectory must be set, the actual day-to-day journey will require spontaneous adaptation to market realities.
And that synthesis of Apollo and jazz is crucial. Because if a company relies purely on improvisation, just the jazz, they eventually burn through all their capital without conniving structural dominance. It's just noise.
They're just reacting to things.
Right. But conversely, if they strictly follow a 10-year plan, without reacting to new technologies or competitor moves, they become brittle and they shatter.
Like a tree that won't bend in the wind.
Exactly. So the author is pitching a framework that serves as an immovable baseline, allowing the executive team to improvise safely without losing the main trajectory.
Now, the document then tackles the giant elephant in the room. Why should an outside marketing consultant build this vision?
It's the million-dollar question.
Literally, why shouldn't Gaurav Chakrabarty, the visionary who actually founded the company, why shouldn't he write the roadmap? And the author uses an analogy that I honestly find highly debatable. They write, and I'm quoting here, "You don't generate your own electricity. You don't generate your own compute. You should not be doing your own marketing."
That is quite the statement.
Right. They are arguing that marketing at a trillion-dollar scale is not just a creative support function, it is foundational infrastructure. But I really have to push back hard here.
Go ahead.
A kilowatt of electricity is identical no matter who generates it. An AWS server functions perfectly in the background without needing to know the company's core values. But marketing a deeply complex carbon-negative chemical firm, that requires an intimate, highly nuanced understanding of the science.
Yeah.
You can't just outsource your corporate soul to a consultant the way you, plug in a Wi-Fi router.
Okay, I hear you. But the flaw in your critique is the assumption that the author views marketing merely as, running digital ads or drafting standard press releases.
What do they view it as, then?
They are redefining marketing as narrative engineering at an industrial scale.
Narrative engineering.
Yes. You are absolutely correct that a founder understands their science better than anyone else alive. However, founders of deep tech companies frequently succumb to the curse of knowledge.
Oh, where you know too much to explain it simply.
Exactly. They are so deeply embedded in the minutia of supply chain bottlenecks, enzyme yields, talent acquisition, they lose the ability to translate their breakthroughs into a language that actually moves capital markets and changes consumer behavior.
So the outside firm acts as a translation layer.
Precisely. Let's look at the deep digestion phase that's outlined in the pitch. The author explicitly dedicates the entire first month to just absorbing the company's origins, the technology, the team dynamics.
They don't just start running ads on day one.
No. They recognize that you cannot plug into the narrative grid without mapping the internal circuitry first. The author frames this not as delegating the vision, but amplifying it.
Amplifying it, okay.
And they underscore this with another biblical proverb. Where there is no vision, the people perish.
That's a stark warning. It's incredibly stark. The point is, you can have the most revolutionary biomanufacturing process on Earth, but without engineered narrative infrastructure, your technology will literally perish in obscurity.
Which brings us to the actual operational hazard Solugen currently faces. Because to achieve this Apollo-level vision, they cannot remain hidden.
No, they can't.
And the pitch identifies their current positioning as a massive liability. Right now, Solugen operates as a B2B business-to-business industrial biotech firm.
Right.
They sell their chemicals to other companies who then use them as ingredients in their own products. And the pitch calls this the best-kept secret trap.
And in the B2B sector, being a hidden supplier is economically punishing.
Why is that?
Because if the end consumer doesn't know you exist, your buyers view your product as a simple commodity.
They don't care about your brand, they just care about the price.
Exactly. They will relentlessly squeeze your margins, demanding lower prices every single quarter because you have absolutely no public leverage to fight back. So to break out of this trap, the author proposes a pretty radical pivot. They advise Solugen to transition from an invisible B2B supplier to a highly visible consumer brand.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
It is. They suggest isolating one hero product, such as high-performance carbon-negative laundry detergent, and building up a massive direct-to-consumer campaign around it.
This strategy right here is essentially the Intel Inside playbook applied to biochemistry.
Okay, unpack the mechanics of that for the listener because it's a vital comparison.
Gladly. So back in the 1980s, Intel manufactured microprocessors. They were a pure B2B company selling highly technical, totally invisible components to computer manufacturers like IBM.
Right. Consumers bought computers, they didn't buy chips.
Exactly. Nobody cared what chip was in it. But then Intel launched a massive hundreds of millions of dollars consumer marketing campaign to brand their invisible ingredient.
The little Intel Inside stickers?
Yes. They put that sticker on the outside of every computer box. And suddenly, retail consumers walked into Best Buy or wherever, demanding to know if a computer had an Intel chip inside before they bought it.
Wow.
By creating consumer desire for an invisible component, Intel forced the massive B2B computer manufacturers to buy their chips or risk losing retail sales entirely.
They bypassed the middleman to get leverage.
They completely seized the leverage.
And this pitch argues Solugen must do the exact same thing with plant-based chemicals. They aren't trying to become a soap company.
No, out of a
Selling detergent is just a Trojan horse.
A brilliant Trojan horse.
Because if they can make a consumer deeply loyal to Solugen's carbon-negative cleaning line, that consumer will start scrutinizing their shampoo, their cosmetics, the materials in their car interiors.
It generates immense public pressure.
And it forces massive multinational conglomerates, the Unilevers and Procter & Gambles of the world, to demand Solugen ingredients in their supply chains simply because the consumer expects it.
It is a brilliant strategy for creating leverage. But the financial realities of actually executing an Intel Inside pivot are brutal.
Oh, I'm sure.
Building a consumer brand from scratch requires excavating entirely new mental real estate in the public consciousness, which is exactly why the author breaks down specific industry benchmarks for the CEO.
Let's look at those benchmarks because the numbers really tell the story. The document states that standard manufacturing and industrial B2B companies typically spend a fairly modest 5 to 7.5% of their revenue on marketing.
Right, which mostly goes to, technical white papers, trade shows, and maintaining a direct sales force.
Flying salespeople out to meet clients, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
And life sciences and biotech companies might push that up to 10% if they are really growth-focused.
Yeah, but that's still pretty standard B2B behavior.
But then you look at consumer packaged goods, the CPG companies that are fighting for literal supermarket shelf space, they routinely spend 10 to 20% or more just to maintain their brand visibility against all the noise.
Just to not be forgotten.
Right. And the final benchmark is the harsh reality check for Solugen. If a growth stage company wants to actively pivot from B2B to mass consumer awareness, they need to treat marketing as an aggressive capital expenditure, often spending 15 to 30% of their current revenue.
Because you aren't maintaining a baseline anymore. You are funding a full-scale invasion of the consumer market.
An invasion, yeah. Having established that pretty grim financial reality, the pitch lays out 3 exact budget scenarios, all based on Solugen's existing $44.7 million in revenue.
Right, let's break these down.
So scenario 1 is what they call the moderate budget, asking for $2.5 to $4 million annually. That represents roughly 5.5 to 9% of their revenue.
Which safely aligns with those standard B2B upper limits we just talked about.
And the allocation for that budget is highly pragmatic, right?
It is. It's 40% to digital performance ads, 25% to content and SEO to sort of build out the sustainability narrative, and the remainder goes to partnerships and PR.
And the goal there?
The goal is to generate a 3 to 5 times return on investment, netting roughly $7.5 to $20 million in new revenue.
The author also notes that this specific budget is designed to break even within 3 months, basically to prove what they call marketing product market fit.
It's essentially a pilot program. You're just trying to verify that the plumbing actually works before you turn on the fire hose.
Right. But scenario 2 is where the strategy actually begins. The author labels this the sweet spot, asking for $6 to $10 million annually, which jumps to about 13 to 22% of revenue.
This is a major shift. This is where marketing transitions from being an operational expense into strategic growth fuel.
And the tactics scale up dramatically here. This budget funds the national launch of that flagship detergent we mentioned.
Right, the hero product.
It pushes retail media and aggressively positions the company as the Tesla of chemicals across broader cultural channels.
And there is a critical operational constraint driving this specific budget.
The factory, right.
Yes. The pitch notes that Solugen is scheduled to open this massive new manufacturing facility, Bioforge Marshall, in the fall of 2025.
Okay.
And you do not pour millions of dollars into physical concrete and steel, open the factory doors, and then sit around wondering if anyone actually wants to buy what you make.
That would be a disaster.
A total disaster. So the sweet spot budget is engineered to create the massive demand pull necessary to justify and fill the capacity of Bioforge Marshall the very second it comes online.
That makes sense. But then the author presents scenario 3, the super aggressive budget.
Hold on to your hats for this one.
Yeah, this is where the numbers just become staggering. They outline a spend of $15 to $25 million or more annually. That equates to 33 to 55% of the company's current top-line revenue.
It's a massive bet.
I have to pause here because this sounds borderline reckless.
Yeah.
The tactics they list for this budget include mainstream TV and streaming ads, funding high-end documentaries on green chemistry.
Documentaries.
Yeah. And dominating physical shelf space with huge end caps in stores like Target and Whole Foods. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of a deep tech founder.
Okay.
You are paying teams of PhDs to engineer complex biological enzymes, and a consultant suggests handing over $25 million so they can go make a movie and buy premium grocery store displays. How does the CEO not view this as a literal hostile takeover of their operational budget?
Because the psychological execution of scenario 3 is arguably the most brilliant part of the entire pitch.
Really?
Yes, because the author actively advises the CEO not to choose it.
Wait, hold on. They build a $25 million plan, outline all the steps just to shoot it down.
Yes, exactly.
Why?
In the world of high-stakes consulting, pricing anchors are everything.
Pricing anchors?
Right. By presenting the super aggressive option, outlining exactly how that $25 million would be deployed to create a 10 times return, and then explicitly telling the CEO that it is too risky for their current stage, the author manufactures immense trust.
Oh, wow.
It demonstrates profound restraint. It proves to the founder that the consultant isn't simply trying to maximize their own fee at the expense of the company's runway.
It makes the middle option look reasonable.
Exactly. It positions the $6 to $10 million sweet spot not as an aggressive ask, but as the mathematically prudent, sensible, safe middle ground.
That is a masterclass in behavioral economics.
It really is.
But, you know, the true endgame of this entire deep dive isn't actually about the detergent sales or even the factory capacity.
No, it's not.
As the pitch reaches its climax, it reveals a mechanism that explains why these massive budgets are actually necessary. The author presents what they call the valuation explosion equation.
The ultimate flywheel.
Exactly. It's designed to manipulate the math of Wall Street.
And this is the exact mechanism that separates traditional corporate marketing from venture-backed narrative engineering.
Let's walk through the hypothetical scenario presented at the end of the text because it's step by step.
Let's do it.
Step 1. The CEO approves the sweet spot budget of $6 million. Step 2. The consultant executes brilliantly, achieving a 10 times return on investment, which generates $60 million in new consumer-driven revenue.
Which is a massive operational victory in its own right.
Huge. But step 3 is where the logic detaches from standard business practices entirely. Because you do not just put that $60 million on the balance sheet and call it a good year.
No, you don't.
You synthesize that consumer traction with the grand, world-changing narrative of the Solara.
You combine the raw mathematics of the revenue with the mythology of the Apollo vision.
Yes, which leads to step 4. The author predicts that using this combined narrative, Solugen won't just raise their next round of funding. They will raise $2 billion at a $20 billion valuation.
A 10x jump in valuation.
By year 2, Step 5 predicts they will raise $5 billion at a $50 billion valuation.
It sounds insane, but this equation relies on understanding how venture capital actually values an enterprise at that late stage.
Explain that, because standard math doesn't apply here.
Right. In traditional public markets, or standard private equity, a company's valuation is often a strict multiple of its current revenue and profit margins.
Like you make 10 million, you're worth 50 million.
Exactly. But in the late-stage venture capital ecosystem, valuation is entirely detached from present-day profits. It is a measurement of what I call the inevitability premium.
The inevitability premium. Okay, explain how that works when a VC is writing like a $2 billion check.
Venture capitalists are fundamentally managing risk. If Solugen quietly signs B2B contracts to sell $60 million of industrial chemicals, they are a successful but somewhat risky supplier. Their valuation will increase linearly.
Sure, steady growth.
But if they spend aggressively on consumer marketing, put their branded products in millions of homes, and dominate the cultural conversation as the undeniable successor to the entire petroleum industry.
They look unstoppable.
Exactly. They eliminate the perceived risk of market adoption. They begin to look like an inevitability. When a venture capital fund, like a SoftBank or a Tiger Global, believes a company is destined to become a trillion-dollar monopoly, they will pay astronomical multiples just to secure ownership before the window closes.
They don't want to miss the boat.
Exactly.
So the author's thesis is that the massive marketing budget isn't just a customer acquisition cost, it is a valuation acquisition cost.
Precisely. By proving consumer desire, the marketing spend buys down the risk profile for investors, which inflates the equity value of the entire company by tens of billions of dollars.
Wow.
The money spent on the advertising pays for itself 1,000 times over in the equity retained by the founders during that next capital raise.
Which brings us right back to the toll the consultant demands to actually engineer this reality.
The bill comes due.
Yeah. To execute this flywheel, the author requires a $50,000 sign-up bonus.
Pocket change, relatively.
Right. But then a retainer of $500,000 per month released at the beginning of each month.
Every single month.
$500,000 every 30 days. That is a burn rate of $6 million a year, just in advisory fees, and that's totally separate from the actual media budget.
It's an incredible fee.
You could hire an entire internal C-suite of seasoned industry veterans for a fraction of that cost.
You could, and
Well,
honestly, most companies would. But building an internal team of veterans usually results in standard linear growth. The $500,000 monthly fee is basically the final ultimate filter in this entire document.
another filter.
Yes, it is an executive stress test. The author is essentially telling the CEO, if you balk at paying me $6 million a year to engineer this narrative, you fundamentally lack the psychological fortitude required to walk into a boardroom next year and demand a $50 billion valuation.
Oh, man.
It filters out executives who are playing the unicorn game from those prepared to play the Solara game.
It's corporate matchmaking at its most ruthless and brilliant. I mean, let's synthesize everything we've unpacked today.
It's been a journey.
Truly. We started with a blueprint dropped on a table, invoking an ancient prophecy of abundance. We mapped that prophecy onto the hard science of biomanufacturing, positioning Solugen as the Tesla of chemicals, capable of dismantling the global petroleum supply chain.
Yep.
We examined the friction between the rigid Apollo vision and the jazz of execution, and we dissected that incredibly risky, expensive pivot from an invisible B2B supplier to a consumer-facing brand using the Intel Insight playbook.
And we decoded the venture capital psychology that turns a $6 million marketing budget into a $50 billion valuation flywheel.
It really forces anyone reading it to completely reevaluate what marketing is meant to achieve at the absolute highest levels of scale.
It absolutely does.
And that is exactly why this matters to you, the listener. You know, you might not be building a deep tech biochemical refinery. You might be running a mid-sized software company, scaling a local retail business, or simply trying to navigate your own career trajectory.
But the lessons apply everywhere.
They really do. The core lesson of this document scales down to any endeavor. Are you treating your brand, your story, and your positioning as an afterthought? like just a coat of paint you slap on once the product is already finished.
Or are you treating it as foundational infrastructure?
Right. Are you optimizing for a safe incremental increase? Or are you daring to construct a narrative so compelling that it literally forces the market to bend to your reality?
It's the fundamental difference between managing a business and engineering a movement.
Which leaves us with a fascinating final thought to chew on. We discussed the author's core philosophy that narrative engineering is the ultimate multiplier of value. But if we truly are moving into this age of abundance, a world where artificial intelligence, robotics, and advanced manufacturing make the actual creation of physical products and software incredibly cheap and universally accessible, does the ability to build the product eventually drop to zero value?
That's a scary thought.
Right. In a future where anyone can manufacture anything easily, does the ability to tell a compelling story, to construct an undeniable narrative, actually become the only remaining currency in the global economy? Something to think about the next time you see a manila folder sitting on a coffee shop table.